few minutes late, but the joy of technology. It was quite funny being here though, because watching my husband almost look like he may be having a live breakdown in front of me is always something that I shouldn't find amusing because of what I do. And yet I do a little bit, if I'm really honest. Also, you may hear the dull thud of what may sound like a grime club, which is actually my kitchen, because my boys have decided to have just a few friends round in the other room, and we did say, could you keep the music quiet? But then you realise anybody under the age of 25 needs 5,000 decibels of music blasting directly into both ears as loudly as possible, ad infinitum, for them just to be able to have a conversation. It's as simple as that. So if you do hear the undertones of what feels like a dingy club, it's because basically, right now, my kitchen is a dingy club. But to explain, I didn't want you thinking that something had gone crazy and I was somehow adding a soundtrack to my lives these days. I'm not doing that. Not yet. That may come later on though. Also, just a thing to say, I've got a puppy on my lap as well, so there may be ears involved in this picture. Just saying. Got loads of questions that have been asked, so I'll get on with it soon. But I did say at the very beginning of my live today, I was going to talk a little bit about the nudge unit, the behavioural insights unit. For those of you who don't know what that is, and some of you may be very much in agreement with them, some of you may not, be more on potentially my side of where I stand regarding the traumatisation of the general public. But basically, it was a unit that was set up in David Cameron's time. He also was one of the reasons why we got the vote for Europe. Again, everybody's on the fence there, but what I'm saying is there's been a lot of division, hasn't there, since these kind of decisions. And the nudge unit's job was to change the behaviour of the nation. Now, on one level, you can say, well, nudging is quite good, let's say, when it comes down to helping people recognise the need to maybe think about healthier habits, because everybody wants to be their best self. We're not always fully able to do that, but it's nice when we're kind of given the opportunity to think clearly about whether we want to make changes to our world. So nudging in some circumstances can arguably be quite good. But when the nudging consists of traumatising people, that's where I think a really important distinction and line needs to be drawn. And if you don't know about the nudge unit, then you may be sitting here thinking, what is she on about? Which is okay, because I'm going to explain. Remember guys, one of the things that I'm often accused of by people who aren't too potentially particular about me is that I speak too much common sense. So let me address common sense. The job of the nudge unit is basically to get you to do what the government want. As somebody who works in the world of psychology, my job is to make sure that I facilitate the navigation so that a client can find a better place. Now, their journey is theirs. It's not my job to direct. It's not my job to judge. It's not my job to do any of those things. It's certainly not my job to intimidate or to make them feel afraid in any way, shape or form. It's quite the contrary to everything we stand for. In therapy, we have 3 basic rules, although obviously there are lots of different paradigms. We have congruence, being honest, basically, being congruent about the way things are, unconditional positive regard. So no matter who you are, I will see the very best in you. And through that, I will help you to become the very best version of yourself because you have it in you. And finally, the one that we know our friendly psychopaths don't have, empathy. It won't surprise you as well to know that in 20% of very high level corporate positions, there are psychopaths. 20% of them. There you go. Makes you think, doesn't it? Question a few things there. So this unit was employed to make you feel scared. And at the very beginning of the pandemic, one could argue, well, maybe we needed to have a healthy amount of fear. And arguably, we could say that that was helpful to make people stick to rules. But unfortunately, it seems like that became something, in my opinion, far more sinister. And the reason that I'm saying this is because I think that what I'm dealing with constantly now is people who've got serious mental health issues, people who didn't have health anxiety and OCD, eating disorders, self-harm, and a whole range of other issues that have been caused through feeling this level of entrapment to some degree within society, suffocation, fear about the future, and a whole heap of other issues that essentially these kind of things can do. Remember, secondary trauma is you can be traumatized secondarily by seeing things and hearing things. You don't have to actually be the person dealing with it. You don't have to be the person losing somebody from COVID. You don't have to be the individual losing your job. You don't have to be the individual going through these horrendously traumatic experiences like losing your livelihood to feel traumatized by the thought of it. So one of the things that journalists often experience is traumatization secondarily. Now, if I were to say coercive control, most of us have these assumptions that coercive control is about being in a really bad relationship. Often, the person within that relationship isn't even aware of the fact that they're being coercively controlled. Often it's a reflective exercise. So later on, 4 or 5 years later, somebody might look back and be like, wow, when I think about what happened in that relationship, that feels like I was controlled. And let me take you through some of the things that, before I start with all the questions that have come in, make me feel like it's really important we have this conversation. First off, what does a coercive controller do? They isolate you from your friends and family. Point one, most important thing to do, if I can isolate you, I can make it more challenging for you to have a level of support in your life. And it means that you're going to question yourself more because you don't have those integral foundations that make you feel safe. Secondly, I'm going to deprive you of your basic needs. Now, basic needs include things like socialization, finance, certainly things like nutrition, as in food. We've never been as problematic in areas of deprivation. So many more people are using food banks, for example. So basic needs have been challenged. But let's bring in basic needs such as education, children being offered the support by social services who would usually be visiting to make sure that any injuries that were being reported were fully investigated. Let me draw your attention to the fact that we've not managed to do that, hence why we've got 2 very big inquiries going on at the moment. So again, an infringement on your basic needs. Also, your coercive controller will want to know where you are, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and if you fail to do it in the way that they feel is acceptable, you will be punished. Also, it's really helpful for that coercive controller to be able to monitor you, particularly, let's say, through apps that can track you. And that's really helpful because that means that they have control over that. Also, really important part of coercive control, got to take over aspects of your everyday life. So where you can go, who you can see, even what you can wear. These are all really important. And also they're going to deny you access to support services, particularly things like medical services. On top of that, they're going to create a lot of questioning about who you are and your self-worth. So if they can convince you that you are less worthy than other people, that's going to be really helpful. The more that the coercive controller can impact on your self-esteem, the more worthless that you feel, the better it is for them, because you can manipulate someone who's challenged with their self-esteem, because people who are very agreeable and actually want to make a difference positively to their relationships will often shift and change to accommodate the needs of a partner. It's like that in coercive control, apart from, unfortunately, the partner wants really bad things for them. Also, if you can humiliate, degrade, dehumanize, let's say, for example, there are people in your society that it's okay to suddenly start calling names. Anything like COVIDiots, anti-vaxxer, lockdown skeptic even. All these different things. And it's on both sides as well. You know, coercive control will just flex in a way that causes as much problem for the individual who's involved in the relationship as possible. It's all about control. Also, controlling finances. If there's a way that you control finance, then that gives you more power, whether that's taking away or giving. But essentially making sure that you are fully aware of what's going on with the individual's finances and ensuring that they don't have access to it, or if they do have access to it, you control it. And of course, one of the most powerful, making threats or intimidating. That's another thing that will really work. So the list I've just described sound familiar? It should do, because for many of you, that's how you felt for a long time, around 2 years. And again, everybody knows who comes to this. I have no issue with anyone anywhere on the spectrum of how you have found the last 18 months to 2 years. Everyone is welcome here. whether you are somebody who's mentally feeling very unwell and struggling and hasn't wanted to go out since the beginning of the pandemic, to people who've just wanted to break the rules throughout because it's driving you to a place where you don't feel connected mentally in a positive way. The point is, it doesn't matter where you are. Unless you're aware of the fact that a lot of you have been traumatized, how can you acknowledge and change that without first understanding what's happened? So I wanted to start tonight because there has been a whole group of people, even in my field, who have been paid to do this to you. And this isn't me, again, trying to cause some big hoo-ha about the rights and wrongs. I'm saying, if you have felt more depressed, more exhausted, more anxious, more fearful, more afraid of your day-to-day life, if you felt less well, more challenged about making decisions, if you started to feel like you're reasoning with unreasonable and nothing makes sense, that's how it feels to be coercively controlled. And I'm saying this because I don't think it's okay that so many of you are getting in contact with me to tell me that you're struggling so deeply and you think that there is something broken in you or failing in you. There is nothing failing in you. Reacting to trauma is really, really challenging. And it can make us feel so alone. And if we don't have this conversation and start to actually acknowledge it, no matter where we are and how we feel about what's gone on, some of you listening now will probably think everything was done correctly, and that's okay. Some of you will be absolutely rageful and feel that everything that happened was wrong, and that's okay. But we all have this common experience of no matter who we are or where we are, we've all experienced these big changes and transitions to our lives. And whether it's right or wrong, what's happened to us, it's happened to us. So we have to understand the impact of secondary trauma and coercive control. Now, arguably, it's up to you what you do with that information. But the piece of advice I give every single victim I've ever worked with, because in therapeutic work, which is positive, not malicious, not Machiavellian, not filled with malevolence, the kind of work that I do is about hope. My job is to create one message, and that message is very clear. Coercive control relationships are terrible for you. You deserve better, and you have to leave them. No matter anything else, the advice is that. So I wanted to start the session today so that you understand coercive control a little bit more, and also to connect with whether you have been feeling some of those feelings so that you stop thinking this is actually something that you have done and is more a reaction to what has been done to you. That said, let's move on, guys. I'm really struggling with my anxiety and it's been worse. I know I need therapy again, but I'm scared to even make the first step. One of the reasons is because I'm scared of what will come up. First off, I'm really glad that you've had therapy before, because it sounds like if you've had therapy before and you're contemplating going back to therapy, it's because it was an okay experience. Yeah, let's be honest. Whenever we're talking about our deep feelings, and particularly when we're going back over ground that we think that we've covered, we can feel this sense of, oh, I've not made it work how I was meant to make it work. I've gone backwards. These are all the kind of conversations we have. It's completely inappropriate and wrong conversations to be having with yourself, because actually you haven't gone back at all. Quite the contrary. In fact, when you start realizing your anxiety is rising and you instantly think about a strategy that works, that's brilliant. This is not a point now where you have to beat yourself up for not having the answers to everything. You've done therapy before, it's been effective, it's in your toolkit. The whole premise of therapeutic experience is to create a toolkit. And you have done that. And you're thinking to yourself, right, it feels a little bit like my anxiety is out of control right now. I want to return to a therapeutic environment where I can explore that. And that is a great thing to feel. So you should feel really proud of yourself. Secondly, look, you may have to wait for therapy if it's not private. Arguably, if that's the case, how can we bring down some of those experiences of feeling high anxiety? Yeah. So first of all, I know I do harp on about this quite a lot. I know, somebody will have a meme of me. Is it a meme, Pete, or is it a meme?
Meme.
A meme. I never get it right. It's dyslexia, can't help it, just comes out like that. Anyway, basically what you can do with that is you can do diaphragmatic breathing. I always get people saying, that's all she ever says, diaphragmatic breathing. I do. It's clinically proven, so diaphragmatically breathe. So try the box breath, inhale for 4, hold for 4, breathe out through the mouth for 4, hold for 4. So always inhale through the nose, breathe out through the mouth. Do it for about 10 minutes, 3 times a day. That will help to reduce the anxiety hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. Secondly, I've got loads of free stuff on my wellbeing side of my YouTube. It's got loads of meditation, but there's tons of it out there. That's the great thing about YouTube. Go on, find some really good guided imagery, meditations or mindful practice body scans. Doesn't matter what really. What it does is make you think about you and your needs. So do that. Get those together as well. Also, you're feeling anxious. Why? It's been really anxiety provoking, but what is the context of that? What's the emotional prompt telling you? When we feel anxiety, it's not there to stay, it's informing us. Emotions are always about informing us. If we feel happy, we're being informed, stay here, this is great. If we're feeling love, we're being told, this is amazing, remain. And if we're feeling anxious, we're being told, we need to be soothed, we need to be relaxed. So you need to bring in that body balance of listening to that prompt and acting with it with your body. If you can afford to get some therapy privately, brilliant, you can just do that and you'll be able to see them ASAP. But also think, do you want to go back to your old therapist? If it worked, that would be a good thing. If not, why don't you look at some more creative therapy opportunities? There's things like schema therapy. If you've had trauma, it might be EMDR that's going to work for you. Get excited about it, because if you're going to invest in something like that, the more you invest in something that you really connect with, the better you're going to feel. And I promise you, there are so many types of therapy out there that people have never even heard of. Yeah, they're all talking therapies, but some of them are more body-based and can be really quick as well. So have an exploration of that as well. And if you haven't got any information on that, or you're kind of thinking about which one would be the best, drop me an email and I will send you the kind of therapy that I think might be effective for you if you just drop me some information about where your anxiety stems from. But like I said, the most important thing in any therapy relationship is the relationship itself. As long as you get a practitioner you like, that's going to be good enough. Also, just going to say this, if you're struggling with sleep, one of the great things that you can do before you go to bed, 2 hours before, really hot bath. And I mean, you know when you kind of get in and you're like, will I dissolve? Obviously, at that level, definitely don't get in. I don't want anybody dissolving. But you know what I'm saying? When you get that really, really hot water, you kind of go quite flushed. We want that heat. That's what we want. You want to be in there for as long as you can take it. Then get out and just allow your body to cool for about 2 hours. It naturally relaxes you and helps really promote sleep. There's some great clinical studies on that. Also, switch your phone off. Switch your phone off. I know we're all like, oh, well, I switch my phone off. And I am somebody who lives by my phone as well. But before bed, switch your phone off. It affects your brain. Blue light, white light affects your brain. So try to relax. If you can read, they're all things that are great. You could also try, and this is for everybody, some anchoring exercises. So great example, my mum has a massive phobia of the dentist. And because of that, I've always kind of had this thing where I really don't like going to the dentist. I don't have a phobia of it by any stretch of the imagination. I actually rather wouldn't go. I'd rather have perfect teeth that never fall apart, unfortunately. I grew up in the 80s. A lot of Diet Coke wasn't very good for your teeth. But the consequence of that is I use anchoring. Now you can go on my YouTube and it's there, but one of the things I do with anchoring is it's visualization, thinking about the best memory that I've got. Mine is always the first moment that my son was handed to me after my labour, and I imagine that moment, and also I use peppermint to smell. So that creates an anchor of positivity and it can really reduce that anxiety. I went on a little bit there just because I want everybody to think about the fact that we've all got anxiety levels that are higher right now. So anything that we can do to bring that down a little bit is going to be better for all of us, including me. Any advice for comfort eating? I eat when I'm depressed, so less than 1. When I work with Comfort Evening, and I'm very, very lucky actually, because I work with WW to do their podcast, to talk to people about these kind of things. And I won't have it called comfort eating, it's called self-harm. And the reason I help people reframe that is because it's really important that we say things as they are. If you have a behavior that actually seems like in the moment it's effective, but after creates a sense of shame and guilt or lowers our self-worth, that's self-harm. And arguably, it's like people have dressed it up. Not you, by the way. I'm saying the world around it. Even the way that we talk about it in psychological therapeutic experience. Comfort eating, emotional eating. I kind of see comfort eating and emotional eating a different way. I think that's more where you eat something really delicious that you enjoy with somebody, that reminds you of something really comfortable and it makes you feel good. When it's something that actually makes you feel bad, you're basically using it against yourself. And it's the same when I work with people with obesity. You know, this idea that people are lazy and greedy, it's all rubbish. It's just not true. But if you think about your body being a vessel of how you feel, much like when people are anorexic, the whole premise is you wear your feelings in the way that you present yourself, right? So for some people that can be overweight, for some people that can be dreadfully underweight, and so on and so forth. And essentially it's because we're not getting what we need. We're not having our feelings met. So on one level, the question is, why do you choose food to abuse yourself? Often with respect, and this is reminding you that this is a stereotype to some degree, in the fact that out of my experience and work and specialised with eating disorders for a long time, this is what I'm going to put into this moment. I'm not saying this is the only explanation. Certainly you shouldn't just take this as, that's why I do it. I'm saying from my experience, one of the big things is if you don't have somebody who can hear and hold your feelings, or you've never felt that you have permission to express yourself, or when you were growing up, maybe there were attachment issues and parents that were meant to be able to listen and hear you just didn't have that option and give it you. So you learn just to swallow your feelings down. And when we swallow our feelings down, sometimes we just need something that physically reminds us of that actual doing. So food operates that way. You can physically put it in your mouth and swallow it down. It satiates some of those difficult feelings. And there's a part of our brain, and it's called the amygdala. The amygdala has been here for a long time. So it's what other people will talk about as the amphibian brain. But basically it's there before, I suppose what I'd argue is higher consciousness. That thing that I'm using now, the hippocampus of our brain, the bit that is interested in feelings and thoughts and why we are and those bigger philosophical questions. But that amphibian brain, or the amygdala brain area, that's more reactive, it's instinct. It's like, how do I solve this problem? So somebody's running up to me with a knife, how do I solve this problem? I run or I hide. I find somebody attractive. How do I solve this problem? I have sex, right? And when it comes down to food, it can be, wow, I feel really empty. Okay, how do I solve this problem? Okay, well, I'm gonna eat. Now, on one level, the amygdala is doing a really good job. It's sensing the way it feels, but it's rudimentary. It hasn't got the elaborate understanding of how conscious we are and how big emotions are. So it just feels something and it's like, I feel empty. Right, I'll fill it. And off it goes. It fills it. It gets the chocolate bars. It gets the nice starchy, sugary food, right? Because when we're feeling that way, we don't get a salad, do we? And we don't do that for a reason, because it's trying to fill us with something. And unfortunately, whilst it's a temporary measure and it works, the problem is it misrepresented the emptiness. The emptiness wasn't about food, it was about loneliness. It was about feeling alone. And food can't fill that. That comes from being able to speak your truth. One of the things that I've done often with people who've got really big problems with eating on all levels, my master's on eating disorders, I'm really into people's stories of their experience with food, because there's all this negative stuff and assumed stuff around it, and it's all so wrong. And when you bring it down to the person's story is what needs to come out. And so often people are just swallowing down pain, or swallowing down needs, or swallowing down the fact that no one else really looks after them. And it's only when they realize that they have a right to ask for all the things I've just said, i.e. being cared for, being noticed, being recognized for our feelings, that suddenly food isn't required anymore, because we're owning what it is that needs to shift and change. Now, obviously, you can do that by yourself, you can do that in therapy, you can do that in a whole range of different ways, whatever works for the individual. But the most important thing to do is to just take a breath and be like, this isn't comfort eating, this is self-harm, and I deserve more than that. I deserve to accept that I am worthy, I'm good enough, and it's okay to ask for what my needs are. Obviously, in a short amount of time, I can't tell you the massive picture, but I hope that's given you some food for thought, using a food term in a weird way, because that's what we do, isn't it? Dear Emma, I desperately need your help. My friend Sarah is self-harming by not eating and has now admitted she went out onto a motorway bridge yesterday. Thankfully, she's not done anything bad. She's saying that not even private therapists will see her as she's too high risk. Please, do you know of anyone near Grantham who could see her, or how we get her seen to get past this wall that's being put up before we lose her? Thank you. First of all, just check in with how you feel firstly, because I think that when we're doing a lot of this care and we really want to protect people and we suddenly set ourselves in a position where we have to save somebody else, whilst it's on one level really, really wonderful that you're doing that, on another, it can be incredibly exhausting and terrifying. And just to acknowledge that as somebody who's a daughter of suicide, I need to say that because I've been there and lived it, and it's an unenviable position, and I don't want anybody else to be put in that position. So know that you're doing your best by just showing up and thinking about this. Secondly, it can be really, really difficult for people to understand that when somebody is very high risk, many practitioners will say that on their risk assessment, they aren't willing to work with that person. And it can feel like counterproductive that you're in a situation where you're asking for that help and somebody's saying, I'm really sorry, this is too high risk for me. However, there is a lot of good reasoning behind that. The one big thing here is the fact that people are worried that if they unearth anything more in a moment when there's not balance, that could actually cause problems and the person could actually go ahead and, shall we say, take an overdose or harm themselves, or as you said, end up on a bridge. So there are reasons why people won't do that. There is risk assessments that take place. Now, what would I suggest? If I'm really, really honest with you, if she's in that situation, there's a few different things you can do. So first of all, of course, there is the inpatient possibility. I know a lot of people are scared of that idea, and arguably I can completely understand why. However, what you always want to do is make sure that you're safeguarding that individual. So if it gets to a point where she feels like there is no point being here and she feels that she cannot control that behavior, understandably that's how some people feel, then you can be really helpful in saying to her, look, this is going to be a big struggle, it's going to be painful for you, but let's make you safe. I always operate that way. I'm not going to talk about, oh, it's going to be amazing, it's going to be a fabulous experience being an inpatient. It can be incredibly excruciating, first of all. What I'm saying is, if you stick with the let's make you safe. Safe isn't always comfortable. Safe doesn't always feel how we like it. Safe isn't always surrounded by people that we love. Safe is sometimes just secure and in a place where you can't cause yourself harm. So that's one option. The other is, if she's at a point where she feels this beside herself, there are things like being able to speak to a private psychiatrist. So a private psychiatrist who's NHS registered, always go for someone who's with the NHS but does a private practice as well. They often offer online consultations, and they even can do full consultations, as in do a full assessment whilst online with somebody. They're not cheap. You know, they can be anything between £300 to £500, but I'm always going to argue that life is priceless, and if that kind of opportunity is there and you can take it, it's definitely something that I consider doing, because it will mean that she can sit down in front of somebody and go through this whole raft of questions. And at the end of it, that psychiatrist might be saying, well, the reason that you're feeling like this is because you didn't realize that there is this thing going on for you, and classify her as a particular classification. And that can be just so powerful for people. Certainly one of my best friends in the world, you know, I literally drove him to the private psychiatrist and took him into that office and wouldn't leave until I'd given the psychiatrist an understanding of the fact that this man would not tell them just how dire things were. That was the day that changed his life. I mean, it changed his life from suicide to success. I cannot describe it. And I'm not saying that's absolutely that will happen with your friend. I'm saying that psychiatrists are highly specialized professionals, and their job is to understand what many other people fail to understand and see. So I would look at doing that. And also just explore some self-care, because it can be really difficult when you absolutely adore somebody and you take on that role of savior. And that's not a bad role to take on, by the way. You're a good human being for doing that. But it can be exhausting and it can be traumatic, and sometimes it can feel like if you don't do it, then nobody else is going to do it for that person, and you almost feel so responsible that you start thinking of everybody else before you think about yourself. So just acknowledge that as well. Do you think those who bottle their feelings more tend to suffer more from anxiety? Yes, I absolutely do. That's not to say that people who decide to express their feelings don't suffer. I'm saying that a lot of people who are afraid to actually talk about their feelings, because you're not giving yourself a release, then arguably you're not able to express that. If you're not able to express it, then it's harder to process. Now, on some levels, some people won't necessarily talk about their feelings when they've got anxiety, but they'll do something physical. They may go for a run, they may cycle, they may box. Like lately, I've been completely obsessed in my head with the idea of starting kickboxing. I don't know why. I think it's because I'm quite a physical person. I'm like, this is probably what I need to do. I probably need to just hit stuff. So that would be a way of people who don't always talk about their feelings using a resource appropriately to displace some of that anxiety. But when it comes down to internalization versus externalization, in our household, it's a known joke that my husband's an externalizer. So when my husband feels something, we all know. And that's no disrespect to my husband at all. It's just, if he hurts himself, the whole street are like running up and wondering whether we need an ambulance, and it turns out he's just hurt his nail. And when it's me, I'm like, my finger's hanging off and I'm just going to quietly just go off in a corner. Neither of us are better than the other. It's just our coping modes. So people who internalize because you're not expressing it, you're not giving it a place to go. And both obviously have their worth in those scenarios, And again, if you are a personal internalizer, then it's on us to not be volunteers in that situation. I use that term because we are volunteers if we know that we're not doing something that could help us. We're staying in a situation that we have the empowerment to change. But yeah, arguably, stereotypically, yes, an internalizer will feel a little bit more anxious purely because they're not expressing the reality of their feelings. And it's important that we do that. The UK is a troubling place for that though, because from day one, we're kind of brought up with the stiff upper lip, don't say anything, just accept that this is the way it is. My mother always used to tell me the joke when I was a kid that the whole of our family was a type of individual who choked to death in a restaurant because we didn't want to ask for help. And it's true, we'd be too embarrassed. And that was always the kind of way I was brought up. And you take on some of that stuff that your adult peers tell you, and it's really important to kind of know what kind of a processor am I? Am I an externalizer, like my husband, or am I an internalizer? Like me, I'm a compartmentalizer. So I have a library of boxes in my head. It's one of the things that I teach my clients to do. Hi, Emma. I'm really worried and I have a serious question. I'm awaiting help with childhood trauma. I remember as a child, I used to make eye contact with strangers for an uncomfortable time. What does this mean? Should I be worried? Okay, so first of all, let's just separate those. You're awaiting help with childhood trauma, yeah? That's completely separate from the eye contact. So the eye contact one is a behaviour, and the trauma and childhood stuff is to do with really negative experiences that have clearly scarred you. So I'm really glad that you're going to get some help with your childhood trauma, because when we get traumatized as kids, we often have problems with emotional regulation. We often do things like question ourselves, and it feels to me like right now, the grown-up you is looking back at the younger you and being highly judgmental of that child. And again, this isn't a blame thing. This is not me saying, oh, I don't understand why. When you feel shame as a child, you're looking to blame yourself because it gives you a level of control. Well, if I can figure out how I deserve the trauma, then maybe I can control the world around me. Whereas actually what you need to be doing is saying, I had no control in the world around me and things happened to me, and that's really uncomfortable. Because I don't want to believe that things can just happen to me, because then I'm not in control and I don't have the power. But unless you give that back to the people who harmed you and be like, no, you did that to me and I didn't deserve it, then you can get in this judgmental and shame cycle. So that's excellent that you're going to get some help. And I hope that you're getting some like EMDR, or the therapist or the practitioner, psychologist that you're going to work with is going to be really qualified in that area, because that will be amazing for you. When it comes down to the eye contact, there are lots of reasons why people develop habits around eye contact. When I was growing up, you were always told if you looked somebody dead in the eye when you were talking to them, you were considered honest. I can remember learning that and thinking, oh my God, if I'm telling the truth, which inevitably most of the time I did, but I certainly haven't told the truth on many occasions in my life. But it was this constant thought of honest people, look directly in the eyes and don't look away. And that bias that was created was quite stressful, and a lot of people pick those kind of things up. And the truth is, what we realise, actually people who tell the truth don't just stare at you in a way where you never break contact, because it's kind of a little bit unnerving. But it takes time to figure those things out. So it sounds to me like what you've done is you've thought to yourself, I really don't like the intensity of the way that I used to connect with people. And now on an adult level, I'm thinking, wow, what was that behavior about? If you've been traumatized, there may be a part of you, particularly if it was sexual abuse, because believe me, people who are sexually abused, wow, they blame themselves more than any other human beings I have met. And believe me, it was my area. Sexual trauma was my area. So I have worked with rafts of people who were horribly sexually traumatized as children, and helping them to see that they are completely innocent and they did nothing wrong, including if they felt at times that they were in relationships with their abuser and felt that they were complicit in those relationships. My job was to help them unpick that they were never complicit, to help get rid of that shame, to help them see that they were always victims. If you have associated potentially this intensity with somebody traumatizing you, and you had that relationship where you would stare in their eyes, etc., and you transferred that to other relationships, then there's a potential shame cycle there that needs to be broken. You did nothing wrong. You're doing nothing wrong. And if you've figured out behaviorally you're not comfortable with that intensity, eye contact wise, that's okay. That's your learning. And you're at that point where you recognize that. So now it's about saying, okay, in therapy, what am I going to do with this? I'm going to work this through, and I'm going to let go of some of that shame that I feel for something that was nothing to do with me and was not my fault. Like I said, one of the big problems as we get older is we get all these adult understanding of how people are meant to act, and then we use that understanding to judge harshly the child that we were, and we have to break that cycle. I talk about that a lot here. Our inner child has only ever tried to do their best to look after us. It's just that a child cannot drive the adult. And until we realize that, we repeat sometimes these negatives towards ourselves instead of actually acknowledging how well we have done just to survive. So I hope I've answered that and given you some insight into that. I work as a mentor at a secondary school in Bury. Oh my God. I used to literally run the Include project. It's quite a long time ago. I looked a lot better, and I was certainly a lot younger. Although I did have worse hair, with respect. But nonetheless, I used to run the Include project. This is many moons ago. I know every school in Bury. I've worked at every single school in Bury. Secondary, not all primaries, but lots. That's amazing. You're seeing a scary increase in self-harm and suicidal thoughts in teens. Services are stretched, wait times are ridiculous, staff have no outlet. Any ideas to support everyone's well-being? I would be more than happy to do some group sessions if you get in touch with me on email, or if you've got teens that can join Zoom sessions and things like this, I'm DBS checked, etc. You would be more than willing to be able to do that. I would happily do that for you. So that's one option. The second thing is, right now for young people, and you guys all know, I've been put in the papers called an anti-vaxxer. I've been called a COVID denier. I am a lockdown skeptic. I will have a badge and a hoodie made saying, damn straight, lockdown skeptic causes absolute catastrophes, one of which is the lack of safeguarding of young people. So I am absolutely out and proud of being a lockdown skeptic because of the fact that I know there are catastrophic impacts, and safeguarding has been horrendously impacted. So young people per se, 25% less developmentally than they should be at this point. So every child has lost about 25% of where they should be at this moment in time because of lockdown. Add to that the fact that some kids haven't got nice homes, they haven't got nice parents, they haven't got access to the right kind of nutrition, they haven't got the right access to a sense of foundation in their world, and school is the one place that actually they got all of that, and then that was taken away. Add to that the fact that we have lots of people with spectrum disorders who can't even understand what people are saying when they're wearing masks. Add to that the fact that kids are already going, particularly in secondary school, through a pretty awful time called adolescence, which we'd all like banned, but apparently we've got to go through it just to become fertile. Who knew that that would happen when we were 9? These are things that happen, right? Then we have young people asking what I would consider are existential questions. We all do it. Go back to what it was like to be 13, 14, 15. Remember, you haven't got the mortgage, you haven't got the job, you haven't figured out who you are, and lots of us aren't doing that till we're 50, let alone when we're 15. You haven't got the relationships that make you feel empowered. Sometimes you're comparing yourself with all your peers that just seem to be doing better than you. That was my life when I was a young person. I just felt really, really stupid. That's why I voted by my feet and I didn't go to school. Simple as that. Because I was one of those kids who questioned everything about who I was, right? And then add to that, all that hope that you thought you had feels like you can't see it anymore. We have taken the understanding of childhood and adolescence, the options to just be free and to experience that sense of what opportunities may be there in the future to dream of. And we've eradicated a lot of that for young people. They don't know what's happening. So we look for a way to control our world. We've all done it. Think about it. You know, somebody's been brave enough to talk about comfort eating, which I think is self-harm. Other people have been brave about tonight to talk about anxiety. Others have been brave enough to talk about just how challenged they feel about some of their physical demeanour. And likewise, young people have to figure a way out. And part of that is often, well, how do I cope? Because I have these overwhelming questions and overwhelming feelings. And the only thing I have is me. And how do I control that? So things like self-harm, things like ending it. And look, I have a bias because my dad killed himself, and you guys know that. And it's still really new for me to get used to that. It's really new for me to be in a position where I can talk about that as a person who's lived it and is still living it. And I've worked through a lot of feelings around my father's end. And one of the things that I don't think we talk about is that suicide is not just about wishing to end. There's also a level of rebellion to it. And I don't mean that young people are going out being rebellious. I'm talking about the existential, emotional experience of not feeling that you want to do this anymore. If young people do not feel that they have purpose and meaning, if they do not believe that this world is a place where they can explore and grow and change and shift, then everything is so overwhelming that they vote out. So there are lots that we can do. We can be that voice. Even as a mentor, look, I love learning mentors. Believe me, I had the pleasure of employing them. I had the pleasure of working with them right at the beginning when learning mentors started to be a thing, and youth workers, and I watched their frontline work. They're the person that everybody comes and tells their feelings. They're the person that the kids who nobody else is talking to seeks out that support from. They're the people who notice when a child isn't eating or is dressed badly or looks like they're struggling. They're the people who notice bullying. These are people who make a big difference. You're seeing it, so use that. Kids need to know that this permanent feeling is temporary. They need to understand that everything they felt right now in this moment, as catastrophic as it can feel, is just going to pass, and others have felt it. Millions of us have. We don't do that. And on one level, people will say, well, ultimately, everybody's journey is subjective. Therefore, you can't just say to every young person, well, we've all been there. That's not what I'm saying. There's a difference between saying to somebody, oh, I know exactly how you feel, when you don't, and saying, this is a stage of experience that millions have lived, where we have questioned whether we even want to continue because we feel so overwhelmed. And then you break their myths down. I'm doing terribly at school. Okay, loads of people do. I'm never going to be able to get a job. Yeah, you will. It might not be a job as a doctor or a lawyer because that's an academic route, but that's cool. There are billionaires out there who've never got a GCSE. I have a terrible home life. That's okay, because you're going to create your own home life. And all the things that you're pointing out right now that are problematic, you're going to build the foundation so that your life, your future isn't going to reflect that. You counter all of those fears and you replace it with possibility. And help them to understand that no matter what isn't right in the system, such as, well, I'm failing, or I'm trying massively hard and I'm succeeding, but it's terrifying, all these different questions that they have, just meet it with a, but there are these possibilities. I think my life changed when I got to 18 years of age and I started volunteering. It was a simple thing. It was a simple shift. I realised that being a volunteer, nobody really cared about my GCSE results or the fact that the only reason I was a good pool player was because I just didn't go to school from pretty much the age of 14. People didn't care about that. They just cared that whilst I was playing pool with them and beating them, not now, I've not played for a long time, but they cared that I just wanted to know about their life. And that spurred me on, and I got more from that than probably the people I was working with. So help those young people see that just because there are possibilities that seem limited because of their education or parenting or their possibilities in that respect, that they're just looking in the wrong direction. Because if they just look over here, there's an infinite potential. And those things make a difference. They say that you always remember the teachers that made a difference. I absolutely do. I remember Mrs. Skinner, I remember Miss Kerr. They were two teachers who changed my life because when everything else was falling apart, they said, girl, the way you string a sentence together, it doesn't matter how terrible you do in your GCSEs, you'll find a way forward. And they sung my praises and raised me up. Mentors do that every day, so do not underestimate your power. But like I said, I will happily, I'm already a patron of charities in Bury. It's a massive thing for me to be involved with people on the grassroots level. Please do contact me. I would do it with pleasure. I've been feeling the dread of getting older because at 25, I seem to be so far behind others my age. Any advice? Biggest myth in the world. If there is one bit of advice I can give to you, my love, at 25, it is this. I came home from traveling after a few years away at 25 and a half, just coming up to 26, because I thought if I didn't get home, I'd miss the boat as far as career and all those things. If I could go back and tell that kid, and I don't mean that you're a child, I'm saying the kid within me, because that's how long ago it is for me. I was a mere baby. I'd say, girl, you just keep going. You just keep traveling. And believe me, traveling isn't going to get you any qualifications, and it's certainly not going to get an employer going like, oh yeah, she definitely needs to get that job because she's traveled, you know? Basically, it was an avoidance of doing any work apart from the odd bit here and there. I'm saying it was the myth. I was brought up with this belief and the blueprint that is broken and it does not make sense. And the blueprint said you go to school, you go to college, you go to university, you get married, you buy a house, you have a child, you save up for a pension, you die. What a terrible, terrible, terrible blueprint. It's not been working forever. Millions of people are unhappy. The blueprint doesn't have to be yours. You're 25. You haven't figured it out yet. That's okay. Believe me, you have got such a long way to go. You know, in 10 years' time, you will have done so many things that you've never even thought about right now. Don't let that limiting belief system set you on a path where you're afraid. Fear is the biggest limiter. The job you have to do at 25 is this. What do I think I'd like to be? Do, try. And you might do 15 of them and hate them all, but you'll figure it out. The most important part for me is to find a level of responsibility and purpose. And a lot of the time we think about meaning in the wrong way. You don't get meaning in the world unless it means something to you. So the reason I do things like this, yeah, it's great that hopefully some of my advice makes sense, but it's because I feel a connection with you guys. It makes me feel like I have some reasoning and some purpose and I have responsibility, and they're really important ingredients in my mental health. So what I'd say to you is, instead of saying, oh my God, where I'm gonna be right now, because you know, if you look to your peers, some might be married with kids, somebody might be driving a fast car. My nephew, he's been old since he was 13 years of age. Not disrespect to him, he's like 23, he's got a great house, he's got a great car, he's nearly a financial director. Like, I didn't even know how to get out of bed half the time at that point. I was always thinking about new opportunities and things I could do, because life's a journey. It's not a destination, it really isn't. It's about what inspires you. And if it doesn't inspire you right now, it's because you've not tried the thing that's going to inspire you. You need to put some effort into just sitting down and being like, what do I dare to dream? What do I dare to do? What do I dare to try? I don't know. Maybe it's going to be acting. Maybe it's going to be painting. Maybe it's going to be photography. Maybe it'll be an accountant. Who cares? Who knows? It's going to be amazing. But only when you take the blinkers off, looking at everybody else and thinking you're in competition, you're not. Believe me, they didn't take your first breath. They're not going to take your last breath. You're going to do that. How are you going to make your life? And it can be technical and wonderful as long as it's filled with things of meaning to you, and that comes from purpose and responsibility. 25, one of the things, like I said, if I was you, I'd look at volunteer opportunities. It's the most amazing experience to spend time with people because you want to, not because you're paid to. Secondly, what is it that you're great at? And don't think you're not. Every single human being was put on this planet with a fingerprint. Why'd you have your fingerprint? Mother Nature is not stupid. She isn't like, I've got 7 billion people here. I'll just make them all feel like they're a homogenized state. No, she marked you like she marked me. One fingerprint. I can identify you out of every other person on this planet, unless you've got an identical twin. That's the only one time that there'll be somebody who has the same. But believe me, she doesn't make mistakes in that way. It's there as your reminder. On your worst day, on your best day, you're unique. You're a masterpiece. You're not something that can be reinvented. And within you, there is something only you can do brilliantly. But you have to be willing to look into that. So get rid of that. And I know that right now there'll be people of like 50 and 55 and 60 screaming at the screen going, oh my God, at 25. It's just beginning. Idris Elba didn't even get into acting until he was 40. And now he's a millionaire. And basically is one of those people that if he's like, you know what, I want to do a documentary on space, they'd be like, fine, Idris, do it. You know what, I want to be a chef. Do it, Idris, do it. I want to race a car. Do it. They'll commission anything with Idris Elba in. He was 40. Don't stress. It will limit you. There are infinite possibilities. Just don't downplay your dreams because somebody told you you're too old or you should try a plan B. That's not the way to live. That's the best advice I've got for you. I'm a student nurse and I'm feeling so disheartened with my choice. Everyone around me seems so down about being a nurse at present. First off, I'm really sorry. I think that you have entered the space at a very challenging time where there is a lot of projection. If you think about the fact that when you're a nurse, part of your job is to compassionately understand your client and patient group, right? It's not for them to understand you, and you know how that feels. It's the same in any caring field. You can be doing the best job in the world, and the patient that you're working with can be like, you're useless, leave me alone. And it will be over nothing. They're just having a bad day. And you have to kind of like, as an agreeable person, and let's be honest, on the personality traits level, nurses tend to be more agreeable. That's why there's more women who are nurses, because they're nicer as far as their personality will bend to a position where people around them feel that they're kind, right? But it's not great always to be agreeable because you're the person bending. So on one level, know that as a personality, you are probably more likely to be agreeable, which makes you more sensitive because you care about the way people are around you, right? So number one, assertiveness is where you need to work. We know that agreeable people need to become more assertive, and that comes down to being more confident about your choices. You chose to be a nurse, one, because you're a highly trained professional, two, because you're deeply compassionate, three, because you want to save people. Literally, you want to save lives. You've gone straight for the hero kind of level of career, which is no faint-hearted choice. It is hardcore. I couldn't have done it under any circumstances. Like, the idea of actually literally being there to save somebody's life terrifies me in that respect. You've done that. And with that, there is an expectation that you should be able to have, which is that people respect you. But the last 2 years, it's not you that's been the issue at all. It's just the way that people feel, and it's directing it towards an area that they feel that they're allowed to direct it towards because, you know, maybe they felt that their loved ones didn't get what they needed, or maybe they feel that other people have maybe got things that they should have had, and so on and so forth. But you're not the issue. The reason you chose that career is because of all those amazing things that I've just talked about, right? That's who you are. Don't lose sight of that incredible instinct, that incredible professionalism, that agreeableness that makes you the great human being you are, and also the power that you have. Because people who work in medicine, you literally have the power between life and death, and you make those distinctions and decisions every single day of the week. So you may have a lot of people disheartened about you, and right now, look, it's hard. Imagine having been somebody who's worked all the way through the pandemic and you've not wanted a vaccine, and that's the only thing that you've done choice-wise that has caused this kind of level where you're getting sacked, for example. People feel that they're being attacked, and if you're friends with people who are feeling that, that's going to make you feel that way as well. So it's normal to have these feelings. It's just recognizing that one day at a time. Instead of focusing on the bits that aren't working, focus on the bits that are. Without people like you, we wouldn't have people being saved day in and day out. And like I said, sometimes we underestimate that, particularly if we're the person with the position. It's like, yeah, it's just what I do. Well, I couldn't do it. And there'll be a lot of people on this thread right now who they won't be able to do it. And I'm okay saying that. I know my limits. And you have different limits to me. And they're empowering and powerful and life-saving and incredible. And people are disheartened right now. And you come into a career with great hope and aspirations and a love for what you do. And you know what? What keeps us sticking is that we have these awful times, but we still know somewhere within us that it's the right thing for us. So allow yourself to be like, well, everybody else feels really dejected, but I'm still working this through. That's testament to your resilience. And hold that, because that's really powerful. And know that no matter what you see online or what you see in the papers, if you ask 99% of the public how they feel about nurses, they'll say that they think they're incredible people who are awesome and who would be screwed without. So don't ever believe what you see in the MSM or on social media. It's a microcosm of reality compared to the reality of how we really, really feel. Like I said, all the things that have been said about me, which is all bollocks with respect, but nonetheless, if you look at it in the way that you do, people have said that I've said awful things about the fact that I think that doctors and nurses are good at handling trauma. I'm not being disrespectful. I think that they're amazing. Just I couldn't do it in the way that they do. Doesn't mean that I think that they should expect trauma and so on and so forth. So it's just know that what you're seeing online and what you're seeing in the press really isn't the representation. I'm sure everybody on here right now is going to be saying that. Thank you so much for listening and joining me. I hope that's been relatively helpful. As I've said, really appreciate you joining me. I will be back as ever next Monday. If you want to come to my crime stuff though, Wednesdays and Sundays, I will be covering cases. And like I said, for the person who talked about Berry, please get in contact with me and let's work something out. Loads of love, guys. Remember what I said about coercive control at the beginning. If you need to, rewind and listen to it. The job is not to ever be a victim. You become a survivor. That's where the power lies, okay? That's where the power lies. You didn't create this. It was done to you. Time to give the baggage back. Oh, and by the way, could be worse. Could be in France, couldn't we? Where Macron's gone full on. Absolutely. Macron, you know what, Macron? You're going to have some problems, aren't you? Because I remember the farming stuff. And there was a lot of problems when you tried to bring in some of the issues there. So now you're not going to let anybody out on the streets at all if they've not been doubly vaccinated or triply vaccinated or however many vaccines you want. People just can't live in public life. Well, that's going to be great for tourism. People like me who are not at all anti-anything apart from anti-tyranny and anti-treating people really badly so their mental health declines and anti-children not having safeguarding protections. I'm anti all of those. But, at the end of the day, I have to say, in the UK, thank God we're not in Europe, really. Because right now it feels like France has literally gone out there and been like, we're just not going to let anybody do anything in life unless they've got every jab in the whole world. And they're not even letting you test anymore. So I say, thank you, Great Britain. Because with respect, it's actually given me a bit of hope that we're not going down that road. But Macron, shouldn't really say it, but he's a bit weird, isn't he? Not very psychologically appropriate, but we all feel it, don't we? Anyway, thank God for that. I won't be going there for any new time. I used to like France. I used to work there. Thanks for that, Macron. Now all I can think about is macaroons. I like them. See you soon, guys.